This is Mrs. Serber. If I had to choose the best way to travel, I would choose to travel by plane because you get to your destination faster than by traveling on the ground by vehicle. Today I will be reading Chapter 8 of the novel The 21 Balloons. Chapter 8, Merry-Go-Round. During the intermission, the mayor and the chief surgeon of the San Francisco General Hospital rushed to Professor Sherman's bedside to see if he was all right. "Are you tired?" they asked in one voice. "Would you rather resume tomorrow?" asked the mayor. "How do you feel?" asked the chief surgeon. "Is there anything we can do for you?" "I feel fine," said Professor Sherman. "Would you like one of the nurses to change the drinking water in your carafe?" asked the chief surgeon. "I don't care. It tastes all right to me." "Could I fetch you a little refreshment?" asked the mayor. "Something to renew your strength?" "If you insist," said the professor. The mayor ran off at a fast puffing trot while the chief surgeon bruised himself tucking in the comforter of the professor's bed. It should have been obvious to anyone, even to such important personages as the mayor and the chief surgeon, that all Professor Sherman wanted during this intermission he had called was a few minutes of rest. The mayor came back with a nip, and the professor swallowed it in one gulp. Then, looking at the mayor and surgeon, he said with a smile on his face, "You know, gentlemen, this to me is very funny. A little over a month ago, I was an insignificant arithmetic teacher who would have found it almost impossible to get to see either one of you. Now, you are waiting on me like a pair of well-trained valets. I thank you for your kind attention. It goes to show how wonderful ballooning can be. You never can tell where the wind will blow you, what fantastic good fortune they can lead you to. Long live balloons," he shouted. The mayor and the chief surgeon joined in a few sheepish giggles, then backed away. By this time, the 15 minutes were up, and Professor Sherman was gratified to see that the people of the audience had quietly returned to their seats and were sitting attentively. The packed auditorium wasn't making a sound. It was waiting anxiously to hear the end of his extraordinary story. The chief surgeon saw, as before, that the professor was comfortably propped up with pillows, and the mayor walked over to the professor's bedside with one hand resting on the head of the bed. He turned to the audience and said, "It gives me great pleasure to present Professor William Waterman Sherman." The professor thanked the mayor, cleared his throat, and resumed his talk. "Mr. F. led me to the first invention he had promised to show me, the balloon merry-go-round. On our way, I told Mr. F. that the name of the invention suggested something at the amusement park. "Just what is this invention for?" "It is part of an amusement park," said Mr. F., "which the children of Krakatoa are planning for themselves. You see, our children now are between the ages of 10 and 15. When we return from our trips to other countries, they help us unload our freighter with great interest. It suddenly dawned on them a year ago or so that it would be an excellent idea if a few boatloads were brought back full of supplies exclusively for them. For after all, they do own a share in the mines too. We agreed to give them 2 boatloads a year. So all of the children held a meeting to decide how best to fill their freighters. This amusement park they have started to build is the result of their planning. The balloon merry-go-round is their own invention, designed with but little help from us. Is there any school here?" I asked. "The children have no formal schooling. We have taught them how to read and write, and we have tried to teach them a little arithmetic. They have all taken part in the building of our international houses, which is most educating in itself. But all in all, a school is sorely needed here. You aren't by chance a teacher, are you?" Just what does the title professor stand for in your case? Professor of aeronautics, I stuttered. I teach balloon theory at the San Francisco Lighter Than Air School. I felt a rush of heat in my cheeks as I waded through this fabulous lie. I had no intention of getting involved again in teaching, the very thing from which this trip of mine was intended to take me. How interesting, said Mr. F. That goes to show how quickly one gets out of touch with one's native city. I can't say that I even recall hearing of such an institution. It's one of the latest, I muttered, practically brand new. Then quickly changing the subject, I asked what other forms of amusement could be found at the park. So far, they had just had time to design and build the merry-go-round, but they had a lot more planned. Most of the usual rides found at amusement parks are impractical for the Krakatoa because they are higher than the jungle life on the island and would be visible from the sea. As a matter of fact, we only take rides on the balloon merry-go-round after thoroughly scanning the horizon for passing ships. We never use it if any is in sight. Do you see that tall pole in the distance? Yes, I do, I said. The pole was straight at the same width at the bottom as the top. It was threaded like a giant screw, and it was about 75 feet tall. That's part of the merry-go-round. That's part of the balloon merry-go-round, the axle around which it revolves to give it spin when it's gaining altitude. Can't that be seen from the ocean, I asked? Yes, it can, but one lone pole isn't enough to attract much attention from the passing ships. We came to a little forest of palm trees, the same sort of neatly kept little forest I had seen the day before, with freshly cut lawn instead of the usual jungle underbrush. We walked through this forest for 100 yards or so and then came upon a clearing. In the middle of this clearing was what was apparently the balloon merry-go-round. There were 8 little boats around the base of the pole, all joined bow to stern. In the place of oarlocks, there were 2 brass rings on these boats. And though these rings passed poles which all met at the main vertical pole of the merry-go-round, where they were screwed into a hub of another large brass ring around the pole, forming spokes of a giant wheel. Each boat was covered with a protective tarpaulin. Mr. F. removed one of the tarpaulins and showed me one. They were nice little centerboard sailboats, sturdy and quite seaworthy. The sails were neatly stowed in trim lockers. I didn't notice any masts, but there was definitely a place for them. Alongside each of these beasts was a large deflated balloon painted a pale sky blue. Of the one side in the clearing, then was a little shack made of bamboo, which reminded me very much of my basket house. On its walls outside, 8 silk hoses were hanging, neatly coiled up in lint. Then was a bell on top of this little shack, which could be reached by climbing a ladder. Mr. F. walked over to the shack, went inside, and came out again with a spyglass. He climbed up the ladder to the roof of the shack and carefully looked over the horizon around him, apparently for ships. "Would you care to take a trip in it?" he asked me. "The weather today is ideal." As an ardent balloonist, I accept with enthusiasm. But as a 66-year-old man, I must confess that I accept with some trepidation. "Is it safe?" "Absolutely," answered Mr. F. "You don't believe that we would allow our children to make such ascensions and dangerous contraptions, do you?" "Ascensions." "Absolutely," said Mr. F. "You don't believe that we would allow our children to make ascensions and dangerous contraptions, do you?" "I guess not," I said, reassured. I am sure that any invention using balloons and wind motive power cannot be but enjoyable. Very well, then, said Mr. F. He loudly rang the bell on top of the shack. This sound produced the same reaction, only considerably happier and more excited as a school bell back home. We were shortly surrounded by children. These children didn't seem to need to be explained anything either. As soon as they arrived in the clearing, they made themselves extremely busy, readying the balloon merry-go-round. They took the tarpaulins off the boat and then rolled them up neatly. 4 of the children ran into the shack where they prepared the hydrogen machine pumps. Another 8 grabbed a silk hose attached to a hydrogen machine in the shack on one end and to one of the balloons on the other. The balloons were all carefully unfolded and laid out flat on the ground, and the nets and ropes which attached them to the boats were carefully placed around beside them so that they wouldn't get tangled up when the balloons were filled with gas. Slowly, the balloons started to fill with hydrogen, the ones nearest the pumps filling faster than the others. They lazily lifted themselves off the ground with the children watching them carefully, constantly straightening the ropes so they wouldn't get tangled. Soon they were all full of hydrogen and straining at the boats, which were roped to the ground. All 40 children were present, working efficiently on the merry-go-round. Although it was apparent that there was only room for 14 of them on this trip, there was room for 2 in each boat, making a total of 16 seats. But Mr. F. and I were going to occupy 2 of the seats. There was no arguing among the children as to whose turn it was. They must have had some sort of passenger schedule they followed closely. I did notice that neither B1 nor B2 were among the children who climbed into the boats when they were ready. I suppose that was because it was B Day of the month of Lamb, and they had plenty of work to do at their British chop house. I sat in the boat with Mr. F's son, F1, and Mr. F sat with the child in the boat, which was on the opposite side of the big pole of ours. This will make the merry-go-round balance better, said F1.